Hello, this is Brian Ackley, director of Alienated, and you're listening to Without Your Head.
Welcome to the station of decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neil, and I'm joined by Jay Weisman. He's the director of Shockwave Darkside.
Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm good. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well, and a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Merry pre-Christmas. I guess this is Christmas Eve.
Exactly. January 5th, on video on demand, Shockwave Darkside is being released.
Correct. Very excited about it.
Mm-hmm. And I know this is premiered at I think it was at Fright Fest in England.
Yep, we premiered it at the London Fright Fest in Leicester Square, which was just crazy because you hear about all these big movie premieres in Leicester Square, and lo and behold, my movie premiered there too. It was nutty.
Mm-hmm. So what was that experience like? I would think it would be nerve-wracking to be watching your movie along with an audience.
It was very, very strange because Shockwave Darkside was decidedly not a horror movie, and we sort of opened at a horror festival, so we kind of all felt like we were rolling the dice a little bit on it. At the same time, the hosts of Fright Fest are big genre fans, and one of them, Alan Jones, who I grew up with reading Cinefantastique. He was one of the writers for that. So there was kind of like a long history of how, of sort of genre participation in Fright Fest. But it was really nerve-wracking. I mean, the very first show, you go into this big theater and you see all the people sort of like lining up and walking in, and, you sort of sit in the back and you go, oh my God, this is all of a sudden real. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't think about it because, I literally flew in the night before, and it was just so much energy just getting there. Finally, it kind of dawned on me, the minute everybody kind of, was sort of settling in to see the very first showing, that, oh my God, this is my movie. People are seeing my movie, and it was very, very, very strange.
Yeah, and it's not. I know at Fright Fest, it's not, or really any of the festivals, it's not just the audience of moviegoers, but there's also actors there and other directors, and so. Yeah,
no, exactly. And we met a lot of different people from sort of different walks of life, and it was really interesting because I love film festivals because I think after you've made a movie, no matter the size of the budget, or I think there's the process is kind of the great equalizer. And there was a couple filmmakers that we wound up just talking to, and we all had basically the same sort of making of stories, or different versions of the same making of stories. And especially when you're sort of showing your movie at a place with an audience, you need some sort of simpatico with other people that are going through the same thing. And you wind up learning a lot because, you work on a movie for so long, and in my case, it's a very long time. You wind up, not in a bubble, but you sort of forget that other people are going through the same things as well. And to sort of talk to other people and just kind of have a laugh about the whole process was really awesome. It really was. And you also get a sense of the marketplace and sort of on the business end of things, what's happening and what everybody's going through. And, it was on one hand, it was very comforting to know that, I wasn't alone in sort of where we were in the film's journey. And at the same time, you can also go back with information to sort of the producers and say, okay, this is what I've heard. And, there's a lot of anecdotal information, which is really helpful, especially, in this day and age when you're trying to break a movie, and, you're competing with, all sorts of media all over the world. So it was really helpful, for us to kind of do that and get feedback from the audience and see what worked and what didn't, and get feedback from other filmmakers. It was kind of, I look back on it as also a bit of a fact-finding expedition, in addition to it being a premiere.
Mm-hmm. Before we go too far in here, give everyone an idea about what the movie is.
Shockwave Darkside is about sort of the last kind of tribes of humanity that are duking it out on the moon. In the future, the Earth has become sort of an irradiated mess. All of the water has been essentially poisoned from kind of all the wars that have been going on. And the only sort of local source of fresh water is located in the deep craters of the moon. There's a group of humans that kind of live on the moon. They're sort of defending, their water from sort of invading forces. And essentially, the movie's about, 5 soldiers that are shot down on an assault, and they're sort of in enemy territory on the dark side of the moon. And they basically have to walk back to kind of safety. And along the way, they kind of make a discovery about the moon itself that, sort of can change the course of the war. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is it really becomes like one of the Twilight Zone-ish morality play, because, you have various characters represents various points of view. And then they essentially have to kind of, some of them agree, some of them don't agree. And, basically, what do they do with the information that they have that could save their lives, but essentially lose the war for their side?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up Twilight Zone, because I think really like the history of sci-fi was, there were allegories for social or political issues, told through science fiction as opposed to, just saying exactly what the story was about.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we wanted to do with Shockwave. As sort of a writer, I haven't really seen a lot of that lately, mm-hmm. and I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of take a look at that and figure out how could you do that today? How could you do that now? Obviously we didn't have the hugest budget in the world, and I thought some sort of kind of story-driven, character-driven, thoughtful sci-fi is with, like a 21st century twist would be a really interesting thing to explore while making the movie.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot in the movie about religion, and
yep.
In your opinion, do you think the movie takes a side of pro-religion or anti-religion?
I would like to think that we kind of left that vague. Mm-hmm. I've had, people of various relationships with their faith kind of look at the movie, and they each have their own kind of take on it. And I really wanted to make kind of a balanced view. I mean, one of the things in the film that they're fighting over it has become kind of a religious war over water, and I don't think we go too sort of deep into the whys. It's just kind of part of the mythology of the piece. Mm-hmm. But I think depending on your own point of view, you may take certain things out of it. I really didn't want to weigh it in one direction or another, because then I thought it would be preachy.
Yeah.
And that would alienate people. So I think, if we've done our jobs, it either, supports your point of view, or it sort of makes you ask questions about your point of view. But we've tried in making it and, writing it in performers and even talking it through, we didn't really want to lead the viewer in one direction or the other. Not to say that we made it intentionally vague, but like a Twilight Zone, which is really kind of one of our touchstones of the piece, you can look at it and go, well, I may not agree with that point of view, but I understand it. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that we took a lot of time crafting.
Yeah. I agree 100% with that. Not only did you do that in the movie, but I think that's the best way to go when you're telling a story like this. And I like that about I like that about the story that you have, because exactly what you said. There's you could take it. I don't want to spoil the movie or anything, but you could take it either way. There's like because the setup of the movie is people of faith were banished. And then the idea was to end war and everything, but yet war is still continuing. So you could take that as, well, it wasn't the religion. It's really mankind is the problem. So you can, exactly like you said, you can take it many different ways.
Yeah, I think, as a species, we always wind up taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And, I don't think that's going to change in the foreseeable future. And, you can make a war about anything, and I think if you couch it in religion, sometimes it's easier or harder depending on the times. So I think that was one of the things that we struggled with in making the film, and just to try to find that sort of that sweet spot, where you can kind of say it and people can go, oh, I get it. History repeats, and again, not be too preachy.
Mm-hmm. And I think you can. It's also, I think it's almost kind of cheap nowadays, where you can. Everyone pretty much attacks religion in a movie. If you see any type of religious character, you're almost sure he'll be an evil guy or some kind of sleaze guy or something. So I think it's almost kind of cheap to go that way. It's no longer edgy because kind of everyone attacks religion. So it was good to have it's there, but you're not going one way or the other.
Yeah, and I also didn't want to offend anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very what people believe in is a very, very personal thing. And, it's not in my interest to make anybody, question, people believe what they're going to believe. And that's a big part of the movie. And again, we didn't want to offend anybody, but we wanted to bring it in a way that, it was interesting and it was timely, because I think there are things that people do, in the name of a religion that is both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wanted to make it a very balanced argument. And that, that took a lot of doing. And, we were very careful to kind of blend some of the religions and use a vernacular that made it couched in a little more of a sci-fi kind of realm. That I think, which is why sci-fi is so good at doing things like this, because, you can, case in point, George Lucas, called it the Force. And once you call it the Force, you can pretty much do anything you want. You can create your own mythology, but there's a little bit of a distance between, the viewer and the storyteller, and then you can kind of read into what you want. And, we took a lot of cues from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a great point. Which, by the way, have you seen the new Star Wars?
I sure have. I saw it twice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was asked what you thought, but if you saw it twice, I imagine that you enjoyed it.
Well, you kind of have to see it. I think even if you don't like it, I think you have to see it twice.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was great. It's amazing the task that these guys really had, and it was probably, I would assume, it's probably the hardest movie to really pull off correctly. And I think they did a very, very good job. I think, you're dealing with generations and you're dealing with nostalgia. Everybody wants this movie to be the kind of seminal experience that, it was when you first saw Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a huge Star Wars fan, nothing will ever come close. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what is that experience then? And I think they did a really, really great job of, acknowledging the time has passed. I think there was a lot of melancholy in the film that was earned. And, not to spoil it, but I think you come into these characters 30 years later and you've seen the weight of those years on them, but yet you still love them and forgive them. And I think it was really, really interesting. It's interesting what they put in, and it was really interesting what they left out. And I really thought it was, I think it was J.J. Abrams' best work, and I'm a big fan of what he did with the Star Trek reboot. So
mm-hmm.
I really liked it, and I thought it was very dense. There were things that I saw the second time that I completely missed the first time, and they packed a lot of information into the movie and it felt like you were getting everything you needed, but then walking out of there, there were questions. There was questions about the world building that I thought was really, really interesting. And, going back to Shockwave a little bit, there were a lot of conversations that we had about the world building. What do you leave out? What do you hint at? What do you need to say head on to give the audience what they need? And also, what do you need them to leave? What do you need to leave out for the audience to kind of think about the world a little bit. And it's a very tricky line, and I thought, they walked it beautifully.
Yeah, because you want people to be able to follow the story, so you have to have some information, but if you go overboard, it's almost, like you're reading a textbook in a way.
Right, exactly. You get the info dump. And in some cases you need that. But I was actually kind of, the first time I saw the movie, I was waiting for the big sort of scene where they would sort of stop and explain everything. And I'm really glad they didn't. And, there are things that I think could have been clearer, but, that's fine. I mean, I'll learn more about it later, and, it kind of left me wanting for more. So I thought it was very well handled.
Yeah, I loved it. And back to your film, and you were talking about, what to add, what not to add. And, there's a lot of, terminology that, you created for the movie. People are saying different things that are unique to the world that you made. And I would assume you could go overboard with that, and you could almost make where they'd be talking, and you have no idea what they're talking about. So how do you balance that?
I think that really came out of the drafts that the many drafts of writing it, that you sort of come up with a vernacular and you see where people get confused and where they don't. And it's very interesting because I think a lot of the slang and the jargon that is in the movie, really a lot of that is carried by the actors. And there are things that, I think that if the performances weren't so great, you can infer a lot because of how they say it and how they feel about things. And in fact, when we started the movie, I said to the actors, a lot of the world building is going to come from them, and it's going to come from their line readings about how they feel about certain things. So you may not understand the language as much as the kind of emotion behind it, which will then inform how the viewer understands the language a little bit. So it was definitely a balance. But I first, I started the script, and, I threw in a lot of jargon, and I wanted to see what people were, how people reacted to it, where people were confused, if they could sort of contextualize it. That was kind of the first pass and the first filter, sort of see what things are working. And then once we got it into the rehearsal stage, kind of use that. And if, things didn't sound right, or if an actor couldn't make it work, we would just, give it the boot. But if we felt like other things were working, we would kind of sew those things in. The great thing about being sort of the writer and the director, if an actor would, say, I have no idea what this means. What are you talking about here? Mm-hmm. And I could come back and sort of say, well, the backstory behind this line is X, Y, and Z. They could kind of process it and go, all right, I know how to play that in a way that gets that point across. Or they would say, hey, listen, this completely makes no sense whatsoever. Can we rethink this? Mm-hmm. And it was, it was great. It was a lot of fun. And I think that was, that was an interesting, it was a really interesting dynamic in getting everybody on the same page in terms of just making the story, because, so much of the story is what these guys are kind of talking about or talking around. And, they then had a lot of freedom to kind of editorialize sort of these events that were kind of happening around the story that we may not be seeing. And I think it was kind of freeing and liberating.
Mm-hmm. Now, it said that this has been a 10-year labor of love, and, you can read that, and people think, well, what does that mean? So can you walk through that process? Like, what does that this 10 years to make the movie? I mean, what exactly happened over those 10 years?
I got older. It's an independent movie. So if you think about it, you're not, a lot of this is kind of writing it, and a lot of it is fundraising. Mm-hmm. An average Hollywood movie probably takes upwards of, a half a decade or so. By the time you spend years on the script, and honestly, Shockwave started out as just kind of a fun little writing project. I didn't really even think about wanting to make the movie until I was, a couple of years in just writing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really liked where it was going, and I was like, oh my God, this thing could really be a cool little movie. It was just something I was tinkering with on the side. There were other projects that I was working on and other things that I was doing. And I really thought, I wanted kind of something that I could just have fun with and really have no pressure, which then, of course, became the thing that in my life that had a lot of pressure, which is really ironic. But I initially, just it took a couple of years to get the script to a place where I thought it was good enough to show, potential investors and bring on some producers and actually start wrapping your mind around how you can make this. So that's a couple of years. And then once you sort of organize the team, it takes a lot of time to find money. And actually the financial crisis was happening around the time. So it took even longer to find money. And we had a couple of false starts, as probably every movie that's ever been made, I think, and that was the other interesting thing about Fright Fest is that, you sit around and talk to a bunch of directors, and the first thing that they'll tell you is, how many times their movie almost got made. And that's true. And that's just part of the landscape of making an independent film, that, you can get really, really close, and then the whole thing can fall apart for a variety of reasons. And then you have to pick yourself up and start over. And that was something that, we went through a couple of times, and it's painful, but everybody goes through it. And I think the movie is almost better because of that, because, you can then, again, it's more of a filter. You go through the numbers, and you run the budget, and you look at all the various scenarios, and, maybe there are edits to the script. And so every time you go through that process, I think it somehow magically brings it a little closer to reality. Mm-hmm. And then luckily we got the money together and got the production together and shot it. And then had a couple of years of post-production, because we shot it in 3D. We mastered it in 3D. The 2D version is going to be available. I hope one day the 3D version will be, but we also had 1,000 visual effects. So we essentially started a little visual effects company to handle all this stuff. And, nobody's ever really done this before at this level. So there was a lot of R&D. There was a lot of, concepting that we had to do. There was a lot of workflow. It was sort of a combination of, really like art and technology that happened simultaneously, as we were making the movie. And it was a fascinating, wonderful, and terrifying process. Mm-hmm. So, all of that, you can kind of look at it and go, wow, that really took a long time, and it was a lot of work from a lot of different people. But to me, it happened so fast, and it's so much fun. I mean, it really is like one of the pleasures of my life, making this movie with these people. Maybe it didn't feel that way all the time going through it, but looking back on it, just personally, I'm very proud about what we did with what we had.
Yeah. At the beginning of that, you joked, over 10 years you got older, but over those 10 years, you have the script, and did you change it, over the years? Because where your mindset is 10 years ago is going to be different from where it is, today. A lot of your viewpoints on like the different social aspects of the story.
Yes and no, I think. I mean, and I think this was really more of the power of the story that I feel like I stumbled upon, because on one hand, it just seemed like as we were making the movie, the sort of the themes of it became more and more relevant. So on one hand, we knew we had something, because it never felt dated. We never said, okay, well, we're making a movie about one thing, and then the sort of political or social climate changed so radically that it was now out of date. If anything, it became a little scarier as we made it. So that gave me a lot of confidence. And then again, you look at, like the old Twilight Zones, or even like the classic Star Treks, and, what happens is that, those things are relevant in a lot of ways.
They're timeless.
So, yeah, they are. I mean, if it's done right, I think it is. So I think that, to an extent, that part of it was actually very rewarding. I think, along the way, certainly the technology changed, that I wish we had. I wish we had, sort of more state-of-the-art cameras when we were shooting. I mean, that kind of stuff, you kind of look back and go, gosh, I wish, if this version of After Effects came out when we started, life would have been so much easier. Mm-hmm. So in that case, you kind of look back and go, oh, well, but I think more than anything, it kind of sharpened what we were doing over the stretch of time, which I think was also helpful. I'm sorry, not to cut you off, but I think it was really helpful for everybody working on it because, they began to see the relevancy of it a little bit more. And, we had a lot of volunteers and people were working on it for little money and, all that helps.
You mentioned Twilight Zone and Star Trek a few times. Now, were you always a science fiction fan, or is that what you grew up watching?
Oh, yeah, I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. I mean, that was, I remember when I was a kid, my dad, and I just sitting around and watching Star Trek. And I always say that most, some kids have, baseball where they'll sit down with their dads and they'll watch a baseball game. And me and my dad, it was always Star Trek. And but in a lot of ways, it wasn't just the spaceships and the ray guns, which are cool. It was also kind of the meaning behind it. And we would talk about it. I mean, we even just, we just saw The Martian together and had sort of a long talk about what it all means. And I think my dad is kind of a literary sci-fi nerd as well, and it definitely rubbed off on me from a very, very young age. So growing up, I've always been a huge sci-fi fan.
Yeah. So how's your dad seen your movie?
Oh, yeah. My dad worked on the movie.
Oh, very cool.
I shanghaied him. He retired, and I said, great, you're going to work on the movie. And he says, I can't do anything. And I said, we'll find stuff for you to do, Pop. And he was great. He was absolutely terrific.
Yeah, so you made him carry stuff.
And then he was there for most of the shooting, and then sort of checked in along the way. And I just gave him the 2D version of the movie, and from what I can understand, he won't turn the thing off. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's got to be a great feeling, especially you grew up watching science fiction with your father, and then for him to see, great feeling for both of you, for him to watch your movie that was really probably inspired by a lot of stuff that he watched with you, and then for him to see his son, make a movie.
Yeah, I think it was definitely very cool. Again, I've been wanting to make a feature, especially a sci-fi feature, since I was probably, 12 or 13. I mean, when I realized what a sci-fi feature was, I knew that I always wanted to make one. And I remember thinking at the beginning of this whole thing, I want to enjoy it. I want to take a conscious effort to enjoy the process and to really understand how special it is to be able to do this thing that I wanted to do since I was very young. Regardless of how it turns out or, what other people think about it, I need to have this as a very cherished memory, I think. And having my dad involved was a real big part of it. Mm-hmm. He also likes to see me sort of going crazy, so he had a great time. I think the more stressed out I got, the happier he was, so he hung around a little bit longer.
Yeah. Now, I think something that's, anytime they've made a movie about outer space or anything, is the design of the suits, because you have to have them where you can still see the act.
The suits were definitely a challenge for that very reason. It needed to look a certain way. It needed to function a certain way. We needed to see the actors. We needed to have the actors lit in a way that was also kind of realistic to the story that we were telling. There were a lot of challenges and a lot of restrictions just in terms of what the story needed and what physically we needed to do on set. They needed to be able to, take these things on or off quickly and easily. And, it was sort of like a bunch of competing factors that led us into sort of our final design. But where we worked from was, we basically started at a place, what would really happen in the story? You have these people that are, a couple generations in living on the moon. They essentially live in a shanty town on the moon with not a lot of natural resources, old reused technology. They're pretty much, our heroes are on the losing side of the war, which makes them the underdog. So they're not going to have the newest, coolest thing. They're going to have pieces of metal that are kind of banged out into a rough shape, that, need to be taped up, that are leaky, that are somewhat vulnerable, and you drop them into the middle of a war. I think that inherently creates a lot more drama than something that's totally like, as much as we wanted to make it totally like high tech, it kind of undermined, the sort of inherent tension that we wanted. So we started from a design, from that standpoint, and then kind of worked backwards. I found Rob Westerfield at Westerfield Studios, and he knew what we were going for, and he sent a couple of designs back and forth. And then, interestingly enough, then our camera crew had to get a hold of it, because the helmets needed to actually light the actors, and we wanted them to light the actors in a way that we didn't have to spend a lot of time on just lighting, because we didn't have a long shoot schedule, and I would rather spend more time filming and rehearsing. So even then we had to kind of bring in the lighting crew and design sort of like sort of a lighting scheme within the helmets, and then bring in kind of like a radio set so the actors could hear each other and they can hear me. So there was a lot of technology that, real world technology that we had to consider while we were making the suits to begin with. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely like you can definitely feel the tug of war between sort of like, design and reality.
Now, you have a great cast in the movie too. Sonequa, and she's gone on to be on The Walking Dead. So I would assume that would help. Your movie that's coming out now, because people would know.
Yeah, I hope so. Mm-hmm. Sonequa's awesome. I mean, the entire cast is amazing, and it was really interesting because they all got to the location, and I actually they were all like they all went to sort of there was a house that we rented for them, and they all got there, and I was in prep, so I actually couldn't see them until the next day. And they all had an impromptu table read, and one of our associate producers just was there, was listening to them. And the next day, he came up to me and he said, "Hey, listen, they all had an impromptu table read." And I said, "Yeah, how did it go?" And he says, "They went amazing. They were terrific." He's like, "They were really, really, the whole thing sounded amazing." And I kind of stopped for a second, and he said, "What do you think?" And he says, "Well, the writer in me is having a tantrum because I really wanted to hear that, but the director in me is really relieved." So, they really ran with it, all of them. They took it very seriously. They took their backstories very seriously. They asked great questions. They challenged me when things didn't feel right. And they delivered just amazing performances under very, very difficult shooting conditions. I mean, it was not easy for them to be in the sand pit, in those suits. It was cold and it was warm and it rained. And I mean, there was pretty much every kind of bit of weather that they had to act through, and yet still kind of be in the moment and deliver those performances. It really was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you go about finding locations to shoot the film?
So we found an industrial sand pit in Harwich, Massachusetts, which is right on Cape Cod.
Uh-huh.
And we were looking for locations, and we chose Harwich. They had a sort of a creative community there, sort of a welcoming chamber of commerce. We had access to housing, so that was obviously helped the budget a lot. And then I found out that they had these massive sand pits there, and we just went to a couple of them, and one of them said, not only did they say yes, they said, what do you need from us? And we literally had bulldozers out there creating like lunar mountains and trenches. And, so it was a working sand pit. that they would basically, in the day we shot it all at night. So at night they would just leave us alone, and we'd kind of roll in at sundown, and they'd sort of wave as they were finishing their day, and we'd sort of pass them in the morning. And if we needed anything to be done, if we needed the location to be changed, or if we needed some hills moved or something, we would just tell them, and they would do it in the morning. And the next day we'd come and we'd have a brand new set. It was truly, it's one of those things where if you look at it in the day, you'd be like, how are you going to pull this off? And then once the sun goes down and the lights went up, it literally looked like the dark side of the moon. So it was one of those things where we just got super, super lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome, because a lot of the older people talked to, like we just talked to Lloyd Kaufman, and he said, back in the day, people would be like that, and they would be they'd be cool with letting you use whatever it was. But he said it's really changed over time, and it's almost impossible to find anyone willing to let you film anywhere without a whole bunch of money and use equipment and stuff. So that was great that you found someone. No, he said just not willing to do it, but actually help out with it.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I also think too that there were a couple of factors that were in our favor. One of the things that I found really super interesting was the fact that it was a science fiction war movie set on the moon. The minute you say that, somebody's going to look at you like, I gotta see how they're going to do this. Because it's just so crazy. It's just such a crazy notion that they're going to go, what are you talking about, man? And we actually did some test footage on as we were raising the money. One of the smart things that we did was we actually took, we got a couple of lights and we went to a sand pit and we shot some video so we could show people, well, this is kind of what we're going for. And it was a great proof of concept. So I had that in my pocket in case anybody wanted to, say, well, what the hell are you doing? We'd show them and they'd be like, oh my God, this is crazy. You guys are nuts. And I think if you get the you guys are nuts kind of look, it really goes a long way, because on one hand, they want to challenge you, and on the other hand, they want to help you. It was also great, too, because, Cape Cod is, it's just this weird little wacky place. And I think there's a lot of, people there that are filled with a lot of gumption, and they're filled with a lot of, that sort of Northeast, this I got to see. And, they were all just down for it. And we got such great support from the town and, the local restaurants, and, we work with the Chamber of Commerce that were great. And we, and a lot of people in town that were just really there wanting us to succeed. And I think it's just also because it's just such a crazy idea, and that the spirit of that rolled over into the visual effects and everything else. They're like, you guys want to do what? And then, you kind of have to show them, and then they go, all right, So it was fun.
Yeah. My friend and co-host on the show, Annabelle, who can't be here tonight, but she always calls my town the Stephen King town of just the weird little stories I tell her about. But I'm from Cape Cod, too, so.
Sure, so So I probably just offended you as well.
No, I'm fine with it. It's
all right.
So you said this was shot in 3D.
Yep.
So did you, when you're shooting in 3D, do you use a special camera?
Yeah, we actually had two cameras. We had sort of a multiple camera rig. So it was two cameras that one camera shot into a mirror, which is sort of like a beam splitter. It was just this massive contraption. It was kind of like my Spinal Tap moment of the shoot, because we had sort of our, one of the things that we were calling it was like Saving Private Ryan on the moon. So we wanted to have a very active camera. We wanted to have sort of a lot of sort of quick camera moves to sort of give it an updated war movie feel. And when we finally got the camera rig up and running, the thing was just really, really big and really ungainly. And it required a lot of cleaning. So we had to come up with, and again, you go back to sort of the original conversation I had with, at Fright Fest with other filmmakers. They do this all the time. There's always like one or two geniuses on the set that say, I can take some old pipes and a bicycle wheel and I can make X out of it. And, so the camera rig was very big. It was ungainly. We had a really great 3D stereographer by the name of Andy Park, who was kind of our 3D overlord. And then we actually had 2 directors of photography, Bob Fisk and Joe Gabriel, and they, really made the camera work sing. They built special rigs for it. We had to kind of adjust the lighting a bit. It was definitely like a huge technical component grafted onto everything else that we were doing, with the costumes and the sets and everything else, the visual effects. So that whole piece was really interesting. But yeah, it was a whole separate kind of workflow. But the great thing about it too was we could actually see, we had a big monitor on set, and we could actually see the movie in 3D as we were shooting it. So we'd have these sort of anaglyph, the red eye, the red and blue eye glasses. So we could see rough 3D on, and that really informed how we made the movie. It was also a great motivator because, everybody would kind of look at the monitor and go, wow, this looks really, really cool. One of the other things that was really great about it was you have all the shapes. You have the shapes of the sand and all the shapes of the suit, and they all played really, really well in 3D. So it was kind of worth it, I think.
Yeah. So, do you think that it will eventually be either released on DVD or at festivals in 3D?
I hope so, yeah. We actually had a couple of 3D screenings for it.
Oh, nice.
Here in LA. And I think it will. I think, ultimately, 3D has kind of gone up and down over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's quite caught on to the, sort of the commercial market in home video yet. And I think that has more to do with sort of the adoption rate of 3D TVs. And, I get it. People don't want to have glasses and all that other stuff. But I really believe it's a beautiful, interesting medium. And, I'm certain that, the 3D version of Shockwave will find its home somewhere, probably not now, but definitely in the future. I think it's just too cool of a medium not to. Mm-hmm. We just have to figure out how to get it into the homes in the right way. And, virtual reality, lots going on in that space. Maybe maybe it'll be part of that. I don't know, Mm-hmm. But I think it's definitely a challenge for the home video consumer to see it. But I think inevitably, we'll do it. We'll show the 3D version.
Yeah. So you mentioned Twilight Zone and Star Trek. What are your favorite science fiction, either movies or TV shows?
Oh God. The list goes on and on. I'm obviously, Star Wars was a big one for me. I think that was the thing that inspired my love of filmmaking. 2001 is a touchstone. I don't think anybody really can capture sort of the existential horror that 2001 does. Aliens, Blade Runner. I also love old sci-fi. Forbidden Planet. I just think that movie's amazing. This Island Earth was a lot of fun. One of the interesting things that we also did, I listened to a lot of old-time sci-fi radio shows from the 50s. Nice. Uh-huh. When I was working on the script, I downloaded a bunch of like X-1s and Inner Sanctum, I think, and just listened to how they use language in kind of their world building. And that I think inspired a lot, and at the time, they would take, from the sort of the magazines, Ray Bradbury short stories or Robert Heinlein short stories and adapt them for radio. And I just find those just amazing and fascinating. So I'm a big fan of those. So, it kind of runs the gamut of and I also just love, Firefly and some of the Marvel movies. It's pretty much anything, anything obscure to anything that's big Hollywood and popcorn. I think if it's done right, I will be there opening day.
Yeah. That's actually funny you mention the radio, because on Sunday here on Without Your Head, we play a classic horror radio from the 20s and onward. It's I love listening
to the
stuff
Orson
too.
Welles Dracula one.
Yeah, we have that. That's up on our site, and that stuff is it's because it's a different type of acting and it's just amazing to listen to. I love it.
Yeah, they're amazing. I mean, they're so good, and they get away with so much. You know, they can accomplish so much with, again, so little. And I think, you know, it's almost like a bit of a lost art, not just radio play, but that kind of storytelling. You know, it's and that's something that we kind of wanted to infuse with Shockwave a little bit.
So, how can people find you? I don't mean like to your house, but how can people find you online?
They can go to shockwavedarkside.com and check out our Facebook page, and we'll sort of be updates and you know, sort of latest news. That's probably the best place to get a hold of me. Don't come to the house.
All right. I'm not invited. I feel bad.
Yeah, no, you can come.
Oh, okay, excellent. So, well, you have the movie out now. Well, it's coming out in January. What's next for you?
You know, the last year has really been about movie prep. It's you know, there's a lot of movie after the movie, as my visual effects guy says. So, you know, we've been spending a lot of time sort of getting the movie ready, getting it ready to get out into the world. So I've just been writing. I think, you know, I've got a couple of scripts that we're going, and, you know, once they're ready, we'll start the whole process over again, looking for money. Hopefully it'll be easier. And then, you know, see what the world takes us.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you gonna stick with the sci-fi genre?
Yeah, for now. I mean, there's actually a horror thing that I'm working on now as well. But I got basically 2 sci-fis and 1 horror thing going. Mm-hmm. You know, I also I love the spy genre, so I might return to that. I did a short film that did pretty well a couple years ago. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, you know, I really love writing, and I really enjoy the process of writing the scripts. So I'm just kind of basking in that and having a good time, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, we are a horror podcast, but I myself like many different genres of film and movies. I'm a big science fiction fan. So, but what are some of your favorite horror films?
The original The Thing.
Nice.
The original going back to my dad.
Okay.
This is a very funny story.
Yeah.
So I was homesick. This is great. I was homesick, and the original version of The Thing was on. And my dad called me, and he's like, "How you feeling?" And I think I must have been in like maybe junior high at the time. So it was just it was kind of the perfect movie at the perfect time. And he calls me up, and he's like, "How you feeling?" And I said, "I'm not feeling that great." He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm watching The Thing." And he's like, he's like, "The Thing." He's like, "Don't turn it off." And I said, "Okay, I won't turn it off." And he goes, "And call me after you see the scene." I go, "What scene are you talking about?" He goes, "You'll know the scene after you see the scene." And I'm like, "All right." And it was, you know, when they open the door and the Thing is there, and he kind of jumps. And I literally jumped 6 feet back. And, you know, it was like a Wednesday afternoon or something. And that just scared the hell out of me. And I called him up afterwards. And I'm like, "Hey, I saw the scene." And he's cracking up. Because, again, my father likes to torture me. So I think the Thing, you know, the original The Thing has just such a place in my heart. And, again, it's sort of that 50s sci-fi. But it's scary, man. It's a scary movie for the time.
Definitely.
You know, and I think the classic Dracula and Frankenstein. I love Frankenstein. I think it's probably one of my favorites. Yeah. It's one of my favorite stories. It's one of my favorite novels, and I'm just a Frankenstein fan, I guess.
Yeah. I've actually been carving for the last few years Frankenstein in stone. So yeah, Frankenstein's my favorite horror film.
Really?
Yeah. It's not particularly good, but it's mine. So.
That's great. What kind of stone?
Well, it's kind of a weird backstory. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Basket Case.
Yep.
So Kevin Van Hentenryck, who's the actor from Basket Case, we had him on the show, and we found out that he went on to become a sculptor, and he has a free seminar every year in the Catskills in New York, where you can come out and you can learn the ancient art of stone carving with Kevin. So we went out, Annabelle and I, and he has these giant stones, blue stone, and he teaches you how to carve first by hand with like a chisel, then use like machines. And so we've been going the last 3 years. I started Frankenstein the first year, and because we were only there a few days every year, so I've been working on it for the last 3 years.
That's amazing. Do you have pictures of this online anywhere?
I do, yeah. I've got, and I have pictures on my Facebook, and we also have a very cool video of the first year we went, and it's kind of like a documentary talking to Kevin, and it's one of my favorite videos we made. So I'll get that too if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. That's just amazing. That's the great thing about sort of the genre. Like your love of something makes you want to make other things because of it, and that's awesome.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great time, and you could come out sometime. It's every summer in Hunter, New York, in the Catskills. It's a really nice area.
Maybe I'll do a sculpture of like Stanley Kubrick or the monolith. Maybe I'll do them. I'll start.
That
easy.
would be nice. Yeah, and so it's cool because you can work on these giant stones. So what it is they have these really big boulders, and so you'll get an area on it, and then eventually when they're completely filled with all different people's sculptures, they move them around the town. Or you can go and get your own rock and do something smaller that you can actually take home with you. So
that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And it's all free.
How big is your Frankenstein head?
Let's see. It's probably about the size of my head. So it's on a giant boulder though, so I can't take it home. But I did do a small Belial from basket case, which I have in my flower bed.
That's awesome. What's your favorite Frankenstein movie?
The original. I love the original and Bride.
Yeah.
That's one of the few, I think, sequels that are as good. In a way, I kind of think it's even better than Frankenstein, but it's a toss-up between Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein.
Have you ever read the original novel?
I did a long time ago because my brother actually gave me. It was it's a novel, but it was it's Bernie Wrightson illustrated novel. So it's Bernie Wrightson artwork, and it's the actual novel.
Yeah, I actually have that. I think that's a movie. Why nobody has made a movie with that kind of look?
Yeah.
It's that I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that I love the novel's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's groundbreaking, and in a lot of ways I think Bride borrows a little bit from the novel in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember I read the Bernie Wrightson thing, and every time I think of the Mary Shelley novel of Frankenstein, I do see the Bernie Wrightson images in my head.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's your favorite version of Frankenstein?
I would say the two.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We have like Svengoolie every Saturday night, and every once in a while he'll show all the sort of Universal movies, and I'll watch them, and nothing quite compares to the first two.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting filmmaking wise is that when the monster's introduced, those three cuts into its face was just so revolutionary and remarkable. And it's such a weird break from kind of the traditional Hollywood storytelling at the time. It was very gutsy.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine, when people saw it for the first time what they thought, but it was definitely, I love the design of that movie. And not far from me, they have some of the props from the original Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, sometimes I'll go over and I'll just look at them, and they're just the whole, aesthetic of that is just truly remarkable.
Yeah, that's amazing. We were lucky they showed the original Frankenstein at a theater in Boston, the Coolidge After Midnight, Coolidge Corner Theater,
mm-hmm.
and they did like a 12-hour. Every Halloween they do a 12-hour movie marathon, and the one year the Frankenstein was like the main film they showed, and I've seen it a million times, but to see it on the big screen was really special.
Yeah, the amazing thing too about them is that when you see them on the big screen, I think the pacing somehow feels different.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's an older movie, it's a completely different experience. Now I sound like a complete film nerd, but the pacing of these things is so. I think you have more patience for slower movies.
Mm-hmm.
When you see them in the big screen, you sort of get enveloped by them in a way that you may take them for granted a little bit on television.
Yeah. Because you're right.
I remember
you're right there, and I'm sorry. It's just like you're right there. You're immersed in the film. I guess you could get up and leave, but it's like you're not going to because it's a big screen. Or if you're at TV, if you're at home or watching a computer, you can do other things and you can leave, and there's more distractions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it puts you into the mindset of what it must have been like at that time to see it at the very first. I mean, when I was a young kid, I remember we saw the original King Kong projected
too.
in a movie theater. It was like a 1 or 2 day only screening, and we went down there. And when you're a kid, you don't really know. You think, oh, this isn't realistic, but there was just something amazing about it, that it just felt like this grand adventure, and you forgive it for its flaws, and you just kind of just become enveloped by it.
Yeah. So if for people out there, if you should look and see if you have a theater like that, in your area, because it really is. It's worth seeing these movies, even if you can watch them online or watch them at home. It's a totally different experience watching them, in the theater as they were intended to be seen on the big screen.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because we saw there was a double feature a few weeks ago, and it was the original Mummy and the original Invisible Man at Brattle Theater, and that was just so much fun to go see. Invisible Man's one of my favorites. I think that one's one of the most underrated of the Universal monsters.
Yeah, they're great. And I also think too, you wind up catching the sense of humor of these things.
Yeah,
a lot
definitely.
More.
Yeah, that one definitely is a very humorous film, The Invisible Man.
Yeah, I remember once, and this is a very strange thing, but we went and saw 2001. I think the first time I saw it on, obviously I've seen it before, but it was playing in some theater, and we went and caught it. It was the first time I saw it projected, and there's a lot of kind of wry humor in it that you wouldn't think there would be, but there are a couple of lines from Hal that you sort of listen, and if you're watching it on TV, you're kind of like, yeah, whatever. But it was, there were a lot of funny, not fun. It wasn't like a laugh out loud comedy of the 60s, but it was definitely wittier. And that's when it occurred to me. I was like, God, you should see these things a little bit more as they were meant to be seen. I think you pay attention in a different way. You see it with an audience. If somebody laughs, it almost gives you permission to laugh, and then you enjoy it more.
I agree 100%. So, anyway, I really love talking to you, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
I would love to be back.
Cool. And so everyone should check out Shockwave Darkside and continue success on your future career.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for me and the crew for having us. You've been a great host.
Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Mark Edward Lewis, director and producer of Blade of Honor, and you're listening to Without Your Head.